Okay, let's go. Let's go. Fala galera, Mundo Gonzo no ar, tudo bem com vocês? Hoje aqui a gente tem um convidado muito, mas muito especial no canal. Eu espero que vocês estejam bem, se cuidando nesse novo surto de Covid está aí, mas vai passar tudo mais uma vez de forma calma. Bem, se você chegou aqui é porque você gosta de quadrinhos e antes de começar a live tem os recadinhos especiais, porque essa semana tem o Mino Day que está rolando tanto no site da editora Mino quanto na Amazon. Se você for comprar na Amazon, clique no link aqui debaixo do Mundo Gonzo que você ajuda o canal. E, por acaso, se você for comprar, clique no, né, naquela Amazon ali que você dá aquela força. E se você ainda não curtiu, faça o favor de curtir a live, já divulga para os amigos, compartilha. E se não é inscrito, por favor, se
I'm just very fine today,
fazer
thank
parte
you.
dessa grande comunidade que é o Mundo Gonzo. Então, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please
Okay,
welcome
so
Mr.
first of all,
V.
I
Craig
must say I'm a huge fan of your
Russell.
work.
Hello.
And I think the first thing I read of your work, it was Eric of Menil Bonnet. I think it was
And
the first thing
Alice,
published
what's
in
special
Brazil.
for you?
Well, first of all, your work, I think, has its own style and personality, and yet your drawings immediately reminds me of two visual styles. The ligne claire, the clear line from the Franco-Belgian School of Comics, and also the Art Nouveau poster of Alphonse Mucha. Have these styles somehow influenced in your work, and if yes, how?
Well, certainly Mucha and the Art Nouveau movement had a great deal of influence on my work, and the French and Belgian symbolists of the late 19th century, mostly for the subject matter, just various ideas that they put into their work, and the look of it seemed very applicable to fantasy, especially working on something like Elric. So that was an influence. The clear line style I didn't become aware of as a term as such until, I guess I would say, well into my career. But there's so much of comics that is simply the clear line style, as opposed to, well, when Neil Adams came along with his illustrative style, which was a complete change from what you usually thought of what comic books looked like. So he spawned an entire school of, I don't want to say imitators, but they just sort of took their cue from that style of drawing. But I never went in that direction. It was a clear line, very linear. So yes, you've got that right.
Okay, thank you. And about Moebius, do you know the work of Moebius, Jean Giraud, French?
Sure.
Because I see some similarities also. Maybe, did you know his work in the 70s and 80s, or when did you take contact with this French expression?
I would have become aware of Moebius in the early 70s, certainly by the mid 70s. I came across an oversized book. I think it was just called Gear or Gir, whichever.
Yes.
That was filled with drawings. I mean, it was really an oversized paper saddle stitch book. And then, of course, when Heavy Metal, the American edition of Metal Hurlant came out, saw his work there. You wonder what the difference is between inspiration and influence. There are a lot of artists I'm inspired by.
First question.
But he, of course, is very clear line, and I'm always in awe at his facility that he could draw anything and seem to do it very quickly and beautifully. So he's up on Mount Everest for me. Wonderful, wonderful artist.
Okay, thank you. Rogério?
Craig, as I told you, one of first jobs of yours I read was Eric. I am a huge fan of Michael Moorcock's works, And Moorcock is a base of the dark fantasy line of story.
Yeah.
He's one of the fundamental creators that make dark fantasy. And Eric is a character he created with some of mockery of Conan. He's the opposite of Conan.
Yes.
Conan wants to be king. Eric is a prince,
Yes.
and such a thing.
we
Recently,
go.
Cassiano is showing.
Yes.
Recently was released here in Brazil. Your Eric, your adaptation of Michael Moorcock's Eric. It's fantastic to see how you capture the essence, the idea, the Moorcock's put in his books and translated perfectly to comics. Can you talk a little how is to adapt a character from a strong character from a heavy and fantastic books to that your language in comics?
Well, it helped that so much of what I'd been doing already, and all of the things I was interested in, like Doctor Strange and the symbolist artists, was there in Moorcock's book, in the settings and in the tone. Ironically, I had never read Moorcock until they asked me to do The Dreaming City. When I grew up in the Midwest, the books that were available, there was Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, but no Moorcock. I never came across it. And so in my teen years, in the 60s, I was reading all of that sort of fantasy. And in the mid-70s, I was living in New York City, working at Marvel Comics. And people would ask me if something about Michael Moorcock. And when I told them I had never read him, they said, "Oh, you would love Michael Moorcock." So I hadn't read him until, I think it was Mike Friedrich, who had the franchise at the time for the character, was putting together a volume, asked me to do The Dreaming City. So I read it and said, yes, I would love to do this. There's a wrinkle in there in that since I hadn't read the rest of the mythos, when I did Dreaming City, which comes along in the third volume, he had no physical description of Elric's arch nemesis, Prince Yirkun. So I just made up the character for what I wanted to draw, which he had flaming red hair, which is not what Moorcock described. So that's the one anomaly in that book. I liked the fact that he was sort of, you would say, neurasthenic, the depressive character, the antithesis of Conan, certainly, and was somewhat easier to draw because he's wearing a costume. You're not looking at the virtual naked anatomy of a superhero or a barbarian kind of thing. And again, those settings just lend itself perfectly to the casting of spells where Art Nouveau design works so well. And I had a tremendous time doing it, and it really lit a fire while I was working on it. And I just worked on it, 7 days a week, and actually did the coloring on the original artwork, which is always a bit of a hair-raising experience to do. Because if you make a mistake, you either learn how to work around it or start over. So and Marvel Comics, when they came out with it in the edition, did a beautiful job with the reproduction of the art. So that was rewarding.
It was this edition you said that the Dreaming City was released here in Brazil a long time ago. It was of the first batch of graphic novel that was being released here. People know comics are children's books or superhero books, and just a sudden we have a lot of graphic novels. In Dreaming City was one of this. In this wave of great graphic novels here in Brazil, a lot of fans and readers of my age, not so young, remember this. Oh, look at this! The new paper strand, this fantastic Arte. Who is this guy? But this fantastic guy with a sword. I want it. I really want it. It's certainly like Africana. I don't know, but I want it because it was. People are not used to have this kind of art in comics. We know you work at Marvel's making some inking, and you work with Q Raven, that character from War of Words, if I am not wrong, and you have your distinct style. And this is fantastic because you are one of the guys who make people say, okay, I can do this in comics. I can make something different from superheroes. I can make this in fantasy. People say this to you. Do you have do you see these where that you have make such an influence in another comic artist or in a line of comic artists?
Well, it's happened a number of times that people have told me that when they were teenagers, and that could have been, you know, a few years after I did this or many years after that, that they spent a lot of time copying the drawings, which is a great way to learn. I did copies of Steve Ditko when I was a teenager, or Al Williamson. I wanted to draw like that. And it's a good way of training wheels. But yeah, that was the one that I think, because of the imagery itself, tied into a lot of what they liked about fantasy, and so would, you know, just simply copy the work. So I know it's had some influence on especially aspiring young artists.
And how does it feel?
Well, it's certainly nice to see. When I mentioned training wheels, especially when you're starting out, you're looking at other artists a lot, and sometimes even copying their drawings, maybe trying to disguise it or flip it around or put different clothes on. But I have a little stack of comics where I will be leafing through and see one of my drawings, you know, in the backgrounds or the foregrounds, whatever. And I save them. I'm flattered by it, because I certainly can't say you shouldn't steal my work, because I stole all kinds of artists' work when I was starting.
I strongly believe I has a poster of Eric from Christos Achilles. I strongly believe that Christos Achilles copied your art. I strongly believe. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a Marvel calendar or pin-up book once, and I forget who the character was, but the backgrounds had waterfalls and trees and rocks, and there were like a dozen of my drawings all sort of compiled into this one background. I couldn't have been more tickled. I was just picking them out as to where they came from.
Look, I drew this.
Yes,
okay.
That's right. That's right.
And when did you start thinking in the beginning, now I'm not just following other people's steps, but I'm finding myself, I'm seeing myself in my drawing? When did you start feeling this in your drawings?
Well, I think when I was working on Killraven, I did 10 issues of that over a 2-year period, and that's a very formative period. It was, you know, the first 3 years working at this. And if you follow it through those issues, almost every single issue looks a bit different from the other one, as I was just trying different styles or just evolving into different styles, learning how to work with models. That's when I started asking friends to pose for the characters, rather than going through a stack of John Buscema comic books and looking at his figure work. I started working from life, so it'd have a little more originality to it. I think that's where it began. It's hard to describe when how a style evolves. It's just like if you look at your handwriting over 30 or 40 years, that will slowly change and evolve. It's not a conscious thing, but the more you draw and get away from influences, the more your own voice will come out. I would say that's pretty much it.
Okay, and talking about drawing from life, from photographies, and this, I think there are two things that are very interesting in your work to me. One is the style of the drawing, of course, and the other is the storytelling, how the pages build. It's not just about the style of the lines. And
Right.
what were your influence on this storytellings, on building the page, breaking down the stories into the
Well, you'll
page?
hear this anecdote from almost every artist my same age, give or take a few years. I grew up in comics, reading Carl Barks' Donald Duck, and then moving on to Archie comics, and then Marvel comics at the very beginning. Um, but I knew all of that, and you sort of just absorb the way of telling stories with pictures. But in the mid '60s, Harvey Comics came out with two giant-sized comics. They called them for 25 cents, that reprinted Will Eisner's Spirit stories. I think 7 or 8 of those stories in each issue, and that was an absolute revelation. That you could evoke an emotion by changing the size of a panel. There's the story of Sand Seraph, in which she's murdered at the end on stage, and the spirit sees that she's dead and steps in front of the curtain and pulls it behind him. And what Eisner does in that last panel is to make that picture much smaller, do it in gray tones, and leave this giant white nothingness all around it. And all of a sudden it becomes very quiet and tragic just by changing the size of the negative space, the size of the image, draining color out of it. So that started me on, looking towards those kind of structures as storytelling, and then becoming aware not too long after of Bernie Kriegstein's experiments in graphic storytelling. That
Also a giant.
and Steranko with all of his innovations when he came. He was only in his mid-20s or so when he was doing those. And I think beyond that, just a natural aptitude for telling stories. And in designing the page, what I drew most when I was in middle school, I guess, I've always been fascinated by blueprints of architectural designs, the floor plans. And that's what I would just spend hours and hours drawing floor plans of houses. That's just sort of imaginary houses. They're always one story. But there would be a lounge, a den, a library, a study, every kind of thing there could be. And that was an exercise in arranging rectangles, arranging spaces, because as soon as you put this room over here and you wanted this, well, now you don't have enough space here. So what do you do to manage that? And it became
Wow.
unknowingly a real training. My ambition when I was a child was to be an architect. Of course, then I realized math was involved. So I went into pictures instead. But I still have a love for that, and I love drawing, fantastical buildings. But I think that was part of it. And even as I talked about the styles, your style of drawing changes over the years, so does, your style of laying out a page. It was a little more standard in the beginning. I loved the 3-tier design. Eisner used that, most of the time. Steranko did that. And a lot of the Killraven is like that. But as I moved on, a lot of Japanese influence came in, the Japanese architecture, which is very linear and right angles. And when I did the Dream Hunters years later, Neil Gaiman's Sandman Japanese fairy tale, I already had a number of books of Japanese art, but I went out to the Chicago Art Museum and bought a stack of them for reference. And it came, yes, right, there it is. I started doing a thing with that and with Coraline, in which I would have one basically large panel on the page and a lot of smaller ones. And that design looked very Japanese to me. And ever since, that's informed the way I lay out a page. Sometimes there will be, you only do it for a specific storytelling point. Occasionally, I'll have just 6 same-size panels on a page, but there's always going to be a reason for that. Either monotony, or in the middle of the Ring of the Nibelung, where I hardly ever use the 3-tier page. I had like a 5-page sequence where these 3 characters are plotting Siegfried's demise, and it's all 3 tiers, and with a checkerboard floor, like they're planning this chess game. Very rigid that way, and only when Siegfried's horn is heard does the makeup in relation to the panels break up again, as does the color. So I usually have a reason for anything that is standard.
And this influence of architecture, did you study architecture?
No.
What was your graduation? No, such a thing?
No, I knew by high school that that wasn't going to be. But oddly, when my freshman year in college, in a dormitory, it was all architecture students and me. I was the only fine arts student there. And, you know, for architects, by their sophomore year, there's maybe 20% of them left. And it's when they realize that math isn't their strong suit either. But you know, my best friend in college was an architect, and so I'm still sort of up on who the architects are, and I love that. And of course, the architecture of the late 19th century and the Art Nouveau influences on that. And a pivotal moment when I was a teenager, the Wits End magazine came out that Wally Wood put out. And that was the first time I think I saw Al Williamson and Roy Krenkel working together on those fantastical cities, which have their provenance from the drawings of Franklin Booth in the 1920s. Some of those high-rising, just these beautiful sort of Greco-Roman Art Nouveau towers put together. So there's a whole sort of ancestry of that going on.
Well, I got a question from Marcelo Bouhid, who could not be here with us today because his daughter broke the foot.
Oh,
the
yes.
foot. He sent some questions. I will ask some questions for you from him. Neil Gaiman, it seems what you are the go-to person almost every time an adaptation of his books and short stories are to be produced.
Yeah, the foot.
How is this process where those projects are born of you and Neil Gaiman? It seems to me like a reader and fan that is a combination that is so correct, so right, you know. Okay, this is a short story from Neil Gaiman. Oh, Gregor Russell has to draw this one. How is this process of adaptation with the work with Neil Gaiman?
Right. Well, when we first started working together, I think in 1992 for the 50th issue of Sandman,
Ramadan,
the Arabian Nights, the Ramadan. What preceded that was 2 things. I had done a adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book story Red Dog a year or 2 before, and I did the script, I did the adaptation myself, and Neil saw that and spoke to me very highly of that adaptation. At the same time, I had done an illustrated book, The Thief of Baghdad, for a book publisher that was based on the 1926 novelization of the movie The Thief of Baghdad. So I was doing these sort of Arabian Nights illustrations. When I was a kid, I read the 1001 Arabian Nights and loved that sort of thing. So when it came to the time of Sandman 50, and Neil likes to cast his artists, you know, what they're going to be good for this or that. He had seen my Thief of Baghdad, so he said, I want you to do it like that, only more so.
More so.
And then, yes, just more so. So then he gave me the finest original script I've ever been given. He captured that voice of Sir Richard Burton, who, you know, wrote the 1001 Nights. I mean, he just captured that. And it's one of the favorite devices, storytelling devices. I mean, other later things are very complex, but this so much of Sandman 50 is a character walking through a landscape. You know, he's going through all those different chambers with the jewels and the swords and all of this, always going forward into a new environment. And everyone was just delicious to draw. And so what we did on that, I asked him to, his script was written as a script, not, you know, panel 1, panel 2. If I am working with another writer, I ask them to give me every single word you want in there, you know, give me an interesting story, sparkling dialogue, and then let me tell your story. Then I take it and find the pictures for it. Frequently, I will find a lot more in the writer's prose than he had intended. Well, for example, the other original script that Neil wrote for me was for The Endless. There was a compilation of, 8 different stories, or 7, for each of the characters of, you know, dream and desire and destiny and all of that.
And Venus.
Yes. Now he did write that as a panel by panel script. And sometimes, you know, I actually did the same number of panels on a page. But there was one, for example, that he had as 4 panels. And I read it. It seemed so rich. I turned it into 14 panels, you know, just, you know, wringing out all this meaning. There have been times where there'll be a paragraph and I think I can get 10 pages out of this. So that is what the fun is to me, is the telling of the story. And so those were the 2 original scripts. Everything else we've done has already been written. American Gods, Coraline, Norse mythology.
Adaptation.
And as he trusts my ability to, you know, adapt that script, he just gives it to me and I sit down and do it. And if I have a question about the text, I will send him a text message asking, and then he'll get back to me, well, here's this, that, or the other. So I'm pretty much left alone. I know American Gods, just to do the script and layout, it took 3 years to do. The original edition was 525 pages. We had 600 pages to do the adaptation, which sounds comfortable. But there's so much packed into that book that it's a real challenge, and that's what I like, but a challenge to get it down onto a single page. It's still, I mean, there's a lot of text in there on those pages. But to take that apart and drop 50 or 60% or 70, I have no idea exactly how much, but you're cutting all of that out and then putting it back together, and hopefully, you know, you find the juice in the middle of it, and are able to visualize that. But that's the fun part, and gets back into that architecture of laying out these pages. And of course, there have been so many I've done for other artists, like on the Graveyard Book and Norse mythology. I script it and lay it out and do the lettering design and send that blueprint to the art, or not, and you know, do the finished art.
There's something I try to visualize here. You talk always about making architecture or some schematic ways to make adaptations, but you also make adaptations of opera and music.
Yes.
And something. How do you because I see this in your art. To me, your art is very fluid. It's very musical in the same way. You can anyone can see that your draws are musical. You can shift from one panel for another, or one page for another, in a musical, in a fluid way. How music has this influence in your art? Sorry, this is a question.
I love this question.
How can you translate music into comics?
Well, you mentioned flow and fluidity. That's one thing. Even if I'm doing a single illustration, every element seems to flow into the other. It's sure. I think, I don't know, but I think it has to do with classical music, which I was keyed into at the age of 5, just hearing some children's, it was a children's record, but the songs were set to short pieces of classical music. If it went from a major to a minor key, I could tell all of a sudden this is spooky. And then it would go back to the major key. Okay, it's happy again. And the thing with classical music is, and you're talking about 4 centuries of music, but I'm thinking 19th century classical music. All the ideas as they develop flow one into the other, and there's a sense of drama and narrative and climactic points that you come to, so rather loud or very emotional, and then recede back from that and go on and develop into something else. I'm always trying to do that when I'm telling a story. But as far as the musical aspect, I mean, the literal music of doing operas, the challenge there, at base, they're much like comic books, and it's words. Instead of words and pictures, it's words and music. The music is giving life to those words. So a lot of it's written like a play. I've only done operas that have a good libretto. There's some wonderful operas that are pretty silly stories, but doing Wagner or Peleus and Melisande is from a play by Maurice Maeterlinck, won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1910. So a lot of it you can adapt, just like adapting a play. What separates it a little bit from doing an adaptation of the novel, there's no narrative. It's all dialogue between two people. There's no narrator telling you what people look like, or none of that exposition. So that makes it a little easier to do. It's like doing a movie or a TV show where it's all people speaking. The challenge comes from those musical moments, like in Pagliacci, where the Vesta la Juba, he just stands there and sings this heart-wrenching song. In Shakespeare, it would be like Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. Now, what do you do with that so that it's not just a drawing of a person looking anguished with a great big word balloon over his head? So finding a visual structure for those moments is what it's really fun to do in finding that, because you have to come up with something entirely on your own, what I call parallel narrative. You are doing pictures that are not in the original source, and that goes for adapting literature too. Like in Neil's murder mysteries, I could point to a number of places where things are going on that are not in his story, but are commenting on it, that are advancing it or illuminating it. But anyway, in the opera, in Wagner, it was those moments that are purely musical that make it exciting, and you have to find that, or what's the point? Whenever you do an adaptation, it has to work in the form that you're adapting it into. I mean, there've been ballets made from Shakespeare and movies made from, and they have to work as a ballet. It has to work as a film. So it's not just cut and paste with a bunch of dialogue in a picture. And even then, when I'm doing something similar to that, I think of Alfred Hitchcock, and you could watch his movies with the sound down. And I think because of his background in silent films, he's always using the image to evoke emotion, suspense, fear, terror, love, whatever. And that is a big influence or pillar underneath what I'm trying to do. How is the process of creation? How is it done?
Geraldo Borges, the
That's a big question.
Watching the live. What's the question? Would you like to know?
You learn how to do it by doing it, basically. You can study all the analysis, and that's very good. I learned from looking at Eisner and analyzing the pictures.
Yeah.
But then you're presented with your own story to do.
Yeah.
I've taken, when I'm doing these adaptations that are going to take a long time, I go to the public library every day, and I sit there. What I do with the books, I make a Xerox copy. I open the book flat up and copy it onto an 11 by 17 page, a piece of paper. So I've got these great big fat borders, empty space all around. That way I'm not leafing through the book back and forth. And then as I'm going through, I just sort of start blocking out scenes. Well, from here to here, this looks about a page worth. And so I'll see if I can fit that in. And then I just start doing these little boxes like storyboards that this needs to be seen, and this and this and this. And then I get a whole string of those, and then sort of like, well, okay, from here to here works as a page, and here to here. And maybe I've got too many panels. Can I take some of these and combine them into one? Which frequently does. I narrow them down and combine them. And then you have to try fitting them on the page, which, if you're not doing a grid, which is the most important picture on the page. Like the aria in an opera. What's the big number here? I learned that from Karl Barks. And I was, just a teenager, and those were pretty much a grid, 4 strips of 2 panels or 3 panels. And it was only a poor old man, where all of Uncle Scrooge's money was in jars at the bottom of a lake behind this wooden dam. And the nefarious Beetle Boys had set these super termites working on the dam. And as the sun was just going down, you could hear the creak of the timbers giving way. And you turned the page, and very unusual, it was like a half-page panel of the dam giving way, and floods of coins and jars. Just, it was the big aria, the big ballad, the big number. And since he was using this grid all along, when you turn the page and see something like that, it has a huge emotional effect. And when I started telling that, I had a point to make about where we were coming from. Just about in designing the page, designing which panel you want to give precedence to. And then you will come across, well, this is this, but this other panel should be a long vertical. Well, you can't put those together on the same page. Now what do I do? And you learn by doing it of just how to solve problems by like being thrown in the deep end. You work it out. The great editor, Archie Goodwin, and writer, he was also a cartoonist, and he was asked this question, where do you get your ideas? I love this little cartoon. He said he had his hand like this. People ask me where I get my ideas and how I work them out. And then there was like 5 panels of the exact same thing. And the last panel, he says, for tough ones, I use both hands. So it's just thinking and worrying it and moving things around until it falls into place. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes. I know when I start one of these things, I have not maybe been doing layouts for a couple years because I've been drawing the thing. So it's always a little rusty at first, and the first few days are not pleasant until something sort of clicks in and you get into the flow. My favorite composer, Richard Strauss, I did an adaptation of his opera Salome, and that's what you call programmatic music. There's so many, it's narrative. The music reflects what's happening or objects. And he said something in the 1920s. He says, I've gotten so good at descriptive music, I can describe a knife and a fork in music if he needs to. So I'm just saying, after a while, you get into the flow, and it's much easier to solve these problems of when the writer is writing about something that has no pictures in it. If it's dialogue, you can stage it. If it's action, you can stage it. If it's a description of, a city, you can draw that. But there are other things about states of mind and what they're thinking and what they're feeling. There's no picture there. And that's when it gets fun to do. But you only learn to do that by being, just shoved into this, and now you have to figure out something, and that gets the mental processes going. So that's about as clear as I can explain it. It's not a, 1, 2, 3. These are the things you do. Yeah, I think especially, well, study film for one thing, like the real storytellers like Hitchcock, and you learn how to block a scene and when to use close-ups and when not, and that becomes part of your inner grammar, and you start thinking along those lines. So I would say study film as much as you study drawing, because both things are needed in graphic stories.
And if I tell, and if I can, it's amazing to see that I pinpoint that you say when there is no a solid description, with the thing is more free for you to make it the way you think. It's more easy to you, because I will work with some artists. I talk with some artists. There are a lot of artists that became a little frightened when they don't have a solid description. When they say, oh, what I can do here, and since to me, again, I am a fanboy of Eric. When you have this moment in Eric's stories that is something hallucinating or something more spiritual or is more fantastic, because there is not that in the book. The book is Eric is hallucinating. It's just that.
Yes. Yeah.
When you do, it's his ear decomposed and things like that. That seems to me more free. Don't you? It's fantastic to see the way that works for you, I guess.
Well, and something like that, right? They don't exactly say what the hallucination is. You have to reach in and pull the rabbit out of the hat, and it helps if you're already. He gave these structures, and that's what made the occult seem even more real. And I think in the spells that I draw, I've certainly benefited from the influence of Ditko in that sense.
I read something, an anecdote. I read some people say, when they read The Dreaming City, they say, oh, I read this comic about Eric and the Manibona, they make spells and so. And I read that the authors, Roy Thomas and Craig Russell, are dabblers in magic and sorcery, and they reproduce these gestures and the symbols. Oh, this is amazing! I say, yeah, really? Is that so? I guess not.
No, and again, well, that's what, get back to Ditko. I mean, he is, I don't know if you know his association with Ayn Rand and objectivism and rationality, pure rationality. And he drew the best irrational sort of occult scenes. But I think it's the fact that he was so invested in rationality and A is A and all of that, that it enabled him to draw that stuff and make it look believable. Anyway, that's just my theory.
It's such a postmodern thing, don't you think? The thing is not real, but you make so real that people think, oh, it's real.
Yeah, if you want to make fantasy believable, there has to be a basis in reality that, or at least in the beginning, certainly you start where it's very real and then you slide into it and it becomes unreal. But yeah, there's a challenge to make that believable, the irrational rational.
A certain thing, you can believe that a 50 feet long lizard can fly and breathe fire, but you can make it looks like a lizard that can fly and breathe fire.
Right. Well, sometimes writers can do anything and make you believe it just because they say so. So now when I was doing Coraline, there's a scene where she goes down into this basement where the other father, who's not her real father, but fake, he started to revert back to some energy where he came from because he's not useful anymore. And Neil described him as a slug. He reverted to a slug, and his arms and legs were like sticks. And then he starts to chase Coraline around the basement. Now, you can say that, and your mind sort of sees that, but when you try to visualize that, a slug with sticks couldn't chase down a little girl. That doesn't, I'm trying to make that concrete and believable. I just said it can't be done. At least I can't do that. So what I did was make it, he's a little more humanoid, but in a process of decay and falling apart. And so he can still, chase her a little bit. And I made him as disgusting as possible, but it wasn't a slug. So after the book came out, I was talking to Neil, and he said, "You didn't give me my slug, Dad." And I said, "I just said what I just told you. I'm sorry." So when the Coraline movie came out, I couldn't wait to go see it. I couldn't look at anything while I was doing the novel, my adaptation, because they had a whole army of artists working on theirs, and I couldn't be influenced in any way. So as soon as I finished it, I went to see the movie, and it got to that point. I want to see what these, a whole army of artists, they're going to solve this problem. They didn't even try. He was on an all-terrain vehicle chasing her around the garden, and I thought, oh, Neil still didn't get his slug, Dad.
Did you say to Neil, okay, Neil, go talk to him. Go talk to him.
I felt a little justified then in my not being able to do it, because our artists couldn't do it either. But there are a number of things like that, or it's not in your own voice. Like he also described the house she goes back into as reverting to a child's drawing. This whole world the other mother has made is completely phony, and it's falling apart. And I just didn't feel like I could do that convincingly, but I tried to give him what he was asking for. So when she goes in up the steps to this house, it's drawn more like energy, almost like a Van Gogh drawing that is no longer holding its solid shape. It's just sort of buzzing and moving around. And so that worked for what I'm doing as an artist, and I gave him somewhat similar to what he was going for. At the same time, I was thinking, Bill Sienkiewicz could do this as a child's drawing, and it would be completely convincing. So maybe Richard Corbin could do a convincing slug with sticks running around. It depends, your own strengths and weaknesses as an artist.
But if Corbin do this slug thing, it will be a muscle one, a very muscle one.
Yes.
You have something like that in Sandman too?
I'm sorry, what?
You have this thing of, I have to do this in Sandman too?
Excitement, you say?
No, you say that thing that in literature or in the paper, in the description, is something, but it would not work in comics, but you make, I will do that, I understand what the author wanted, but I will do this. And Sandman has this too?
I can get it across, but just in a different way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And going back to Coraline, I noticed that you, in the adaptations, you use a very realistic style to portray real people, something very different from the visual conceptions of the movie and the books, the cover, the illustrations. And why this point of view, and how was your adaptation process here? Because it's very different from the other adaptations.
Oh, very much so. I mean, the animators there's so many designers, everybody working to come up with this. When I'm doing an adaptation, I'm the interior designer, the costume designer, the character designer. I just tend to work, I think, better with real people. Coraline, more than any other book I've done, after it came out, I kept seeing things, I should have done this or that. There's always second thoughts after it's printed, and especially years later, you look at it, want to fiddle with it. The thing on Coraline, I thought afterwards, after the fact, that when she goes through the doorway into the mirror image of her own house, where the other mother and other father is, and it starts out very sweet and tasty until it starts going bad. I should have tilted the camera, as they say. I drew it sort of straight up and down for the most part. And on the other side, I just thought it should be off kilter a little bit. So that's one of those things you sort of realize after you do a thing. Hopefully, I mean, that's you. Hopefully the reader isn't thinking that. They're just seeing what you've done and they like it or they don't. I have done things like in some of the fairy tales of Oscar Wilde where it's much more of an animated feel, drawing from a cartoonishness, and that's drawn all out of my head. And I like working in that style too. A lot of Sandman 50 has a more of an animated or cartoonish feel and not quite as realistic. I did notice, since I do work with real people, that the girl I used for the model, the daughter of a friend, I started asking around. I need, someone for this about 11, 12-year-old girl. And so she would come over, and I had, 180 some pages, and we could only do so much photo reference. I noticed towards the end, and we would work for 45 minutes, she'd start yawning. So I had enough to work with, and a month later we'd get together again. I noticed towards the end of the year, she was growing. With kids, they hit that spurt.
In 1 year.
Yes, yeah. So luckily that was towards the end of the book. So maybe in the course of the real story, she had hit a growth spurt.
In your approach to Caroline, I think it worked better to me because there is a difference between these two words. Because in the movie, I like the movie, but I think when we have doll styles, puppet styles, toy styles in the two words, there is no big difference. It's a smaller difference than you have in photographic style and cartoonistic style, as you did. So I think it worked better to me, much better.
On that same line, you see the good mother looks like she does, and then you see her exactly the same on the other side, except with those big button eyes. So that's really all you need to show this rather terrifying difference between the two. And she can look perfectly normal in every other way. It's just these button eyes that give her away.
Yes, and I would like to go back to opera a little bit. You said that opera usually have silly stories, and they generally have also literary origins, and they go to print medium, to stage with music, image and music, but when you make an adaptation of opera, you put it back on printed media. So there is words, but also image, but static images. Do you use the original source as reference also, or you attain only to what you have in opera?
Both. When I did Peleus and Melisande, I was pretty much going directly from Maeterlinck's play. I was listening to the opera, but only I think in one or two places did the music influence the adaptation. Now, when I was doing Salome from the Oscar Wilde play, I was listening to Strauss's music. And for instance, there is on when she looks down into the cistern and where John the Baptist is. And the way I laid it out, and I did this because of the music, when she on stage looks into the cistern, the orchestral color gets very dark. I mean, dark strings. Strauss is evoking darkness, the idea of darkness. And that influenced what I did, which was her looking down into the bars of the cistern. We get very close and go through them until the panel is solid black. And then we reverse our shot and we're looking up through them and come back up. So in that sense, the music influenced. And in the Ring of the Nibelung, Wagner used what they call leitmotifs, which is basically an idea, a theme for every character and object. The sword has a theme, all of that. And well, he had used it, thousands of times throughout. I couldn't follow every leitmotif. It'd be a 10,000-page graphic novel and probably not that interesting. But at certain important points, I'm listening to the music for the final destruction of the world. You know, it's like a 12-minute orchestral thing that ends. I followed all of those leitmotifs, went to the piano, played through those, and figured out exactly what's happening on stage as the way this music unfolds. So if you're listening to the music and looking at those pages, those long silent pages I did, every single image there is a reflection of what is happening in the music, because he's using the music not as just, you know, grandiose emotional music. It's telling a story. Here's where Valhalla goes up in flames, and here's where it comes down. Here's where Hunding reaches for the ring, and the Rhine maidens get it again and finally go underneath the water. You have the sound of the water until everything is calm again and the world is redeemed through love. So trying to find pictures of that it takes some doing, but it's all laid out there in the music.
And you made an association with architecture and the panel. And would have it be also some association with the music partition and the page? I think when we work with music and comics, you see also a page as some kind of partition, musical partition.
Yeah. I think of that more as like stanzas of a poem. They're all, you know, parts of the same integrated poem, but they stand alone, at least. And now with digital comics, you can go on a scroll if you want, which is a whole other level of design. But yeah, at the end of each page, you can see it working as a unit that relates to the next one. Sometimes it's a direct follow through to the next. But I would rarely end a scene on the first panel of the next page. So yeah, so they're partitions. I think of them as stanzas.
Yes.
Well, can I make a question here? It's a question
Yes.
from Marcelo Bouhid. It's a serious one. Marcelo asks, how do you see, and I will put a little arrow to the question of Bouhid. How do you see comic as a tool to discuss gender topics? And my add-on is, my wife Germana is a comic author, and she always puts in her comics questions, topics about diversity, inclusion, and such. How do you see comics a tool for this?
Well, comics, I think, can do anything on any subject matter. I like the idea of, in the same way with film, you can use it as documentary, as an essay or a political essay, anything you want. It doesn't have to be fictional, is what I'm saying. So you can address it directly or through the characters themselves. And you always have to be careful you're not preaching that any point you want to make has to come out of the drama and be expressed through that and not pasted on top of it. You have to let the characters in the situation inform the reader, and then the reader obviously always draws their own conclusions. I've used this form in, you say, a documentary way, and that was in the music issue of Comics Journal, in which I did a 3-page life of Eric Wolfgang Korngold, who virtually invented the sound of a music film score, and his life and the Nazis and being driven from there and Hollywood and all of that. And I enjoyed that a great deal. It's a different way of storytelling. The panels don't always flow one into the next. Like any documentary, you're doing just this and then a completely, 10 years later panel, possibly. But that's about the extent of what I would know on how to address, topics.
We have another question here from an audience, from Ron Dios, and he asked if you accompany, if you follow up the comics in the last 10 years or such, if you know or if you see some new names, new comic artists. And if you say, oh, I know, this guy is good. I don't like this one or
Yeah.
such thing. And if you know some, if you know any Brazilian artist
I'm
or
afraid
comics,
I don't. The last 15 or so years, I've been so involved in my own work that I have to be told who's doing what. Like when we were sort of casting artists, you would say for the Norse mythology book, I was putting forward artists that I knew, but my editor Daniel Shaban was exposing me to the Spanish artists, for example, David Rubin, Piotr Kowalski, the Polish artist, and I didn't know their work at all. And I looked it up, and well, yes, sure. So that was good for me to be exposed, but from someone who had a way better grasp of what's going on right now. I just got back from Columbus Crossroads in Columbus, Ohio, where Ohio State University is, the Billy Ireland Cartoon Research Library. They do this every year, and it's a wonderful convention. All these young artists, it's not so much a dealer's, with big long books of comics, boxes of comic books, but all these young creative types and lots of panels analyzing work. And I saw work by artists, just wonderful stuff that was all new to me. So I'm not the one to go to see, ask about what's happening right now. I'm the one that needs to be exposed to it more.
And another question from Marcelo Bouhid. There are any character that you want to write or draw that you haven't yet?
That I haven't yet. No. And I don't know this until when we're doing crowd-funded projects. I'll put out, like, I have spots for 6 commissions. And when I started that, I would just say, the characters I had done, Sandman, Doctor Strange, any of the characters from the operas. But then we just started taking requests, and I would do the characters I'd never drawn before. And I have to research them a bit. But I really like that, because I had certain characters I thought I really like drawing this one. I did not know that. I didn't know that I would. But a drawing is a drawing, and sometimes if you invest yourself in it, it just takes off, and you find yourself completely involved in something you might not have otherwise. And it's the same with working with a script from another writer or adapting the script. There are scenes in there you would never draw on your own. For example, in Coraline, there's a scene in the Magic Theater where Coraline goes in, and all the seats are filled with dogs. There's a dog in every seat in the theater, and I obsessed about that for months. I dreaded it. For something. I couldn't get my head around the idea of all these dogs, and even just drawing a theater and getting the seats in perspective, and now you have to put dogs in each one. I would wake up at night and just like this, and it turned out it was the last panel I drew in the entire thing, and
Because of dogs?
With all the dogs, and it's one of the favorite drawings I've ever done that I can look at, and I just feel great. I don't know why I was obsessing. Once I got into then I had photos and pictures of dogs of all breeds all around me. But then once I got going, it came quickly, and they're sort of cartoony style, which makes it easier to draw. And I had a great time, and I would never have done that on my own if I just didn't have to do that.
And about a new game, I'm back again. Is there any cake in the oven? Can we expect some new collaborations in the future?
Well, I'm working on Only the End of the World again. Now, we did this. I did the script adaptation and laid it out as 48 pages for the artist Troy Nixie, who did the final artwork. And a few years ago, they came out with a new edition that had all 48 pages in color. And then what followed was my layouts on the left-hand page and his black and white drawings on the right-hand page next to each other. And I realized for the first time how many changes had been made to the layouts. And I still had my original pages with the layouts on them. I'd sent him copies. They're sitting here, and I would really like to do my own version of it. Now, I've never done this before in which I gave layouts to an artist, and then you're like saying, well, now here's to do it the right way, you know. I wouldn't do that, but there were so many changes. I just felt like I'm going to do my version of it, and I'm supposed to have been farther along than I am now, but that's the next thing that's coming out with Neil.
You're making you're making your director edition.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
I would ask, it's the first time you retell the same story?
Well, yes and no. The Doctor Strange annual that I worked on from 1972 to and was published in 1976. We redid it in 1995. The original story was 35 pages, and we realized, well, if we do 13 more, we'll have a 48-page book. And I was working with writer Mark Andraco on expanding it, and when I thought, and Marvel said, yes, okay, we can do that, and we'll expand it. But once I started working on it, my drawing style was so different from the original that I couldn't, you know, just, it would look awkward to have those 35 pages plus the other 13. So I decided I needed to redraw all of those pages. I was just going to trace them off and re-ink them in my sort of contemporary style. And then after doing about 10 of those pages, I thought, if I'm putting all this work into it, why am I just copying the old pages? Just, you know, do new pages of the same scenes. So it was a real mix. But of all the things I've done, I think partly because I could work with all the best of the earlier version, and I had that at my fingertips, and I could do all the new stuff, like comparing the full page of Ditkopolis from the 76 version and the 95 version. I think that one is far superior. That's one of the ones that I put on a short list of anything I've done, is that Doctor Strange from 95. So it was a reworking of the earlier piece.
Yeah. No, it's okay. You answered my question.
More question from the audience?
Yeah. And Alex Barroso says, do you intend to adapt another opera?
I would like to. I just adapted Carmen for the Arizona Opera that I did the layouts for 90 pages. And, bad me. I can't think of her name, the artist that did the finished art. And so I did that, which would make, if I want to count that, I always said I wanted to do 12 operas. I've done 11, and that would make number 12. But I did do the finished art for it. So I thought of Stravinsky's the Nightingale and the Emperor, I think is the title of it, from a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. Some people from the Eastman School of Music asked me if I would be interested in doing it, because they have taken my Peleus and Melisande and Salome and done them on the big screen, showing the artwork as the music is being played. So you're watching an opera. There's no one is singing, you're reading the word balloons. And since I follow the libretto very closely, they were able to make these stage or film productions of the work, and almost like the Ken Burns documentary style, pan and scan and coming in close and moving the camera around and doing fades and all of that. So they suggested that Stravinsky rather short opera to do, which might be one.
I have some little story to tell. I just had a photography show in a theater here in Rio de Janeiro. It's a theater that presents operas. And the show started with the opening day of a presentation of Carmen, and ended in the presentation of opening day of a presentation of Pagliacci. So two operas you drawn.
Yeah, yes. Have you ever seen Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather 3?
Oh yes, the scene from Pagliacci. Ah
No,
yes,
Cavalleria. It's
uh,
Cavalleria Rusticana,
yes. Oh no,
and
no.
yeah, they're frequently performed together.
I,
But yes,
no, okay. I just made a mistake. There is a scene
yeah.
from Pagliacci in Untouchables also.
Oh, yes, right. I've
when
seen that
when
one too.
when the Al Capone is in the theater watching Pagliacci, and
Yeah,
someone kills Maloney, the
yeah,
Sean Connery character, and go to the theater to tell him, and he's piange Pagliacci, or piange, ridi Pagliacci,
yes, yes,
pone la giuba, ridi Pagliacci, and he's crying and smiling at the same time. Great scene,
yeah.
great scene.
It's a great. They know how to do that stuff. I tell you. And with the end of Cavalleria Rusticana on stage, that Michael Corleone and his wife are watching it. Their son is singing, and at the same time, all these people are being murdered.
Yes.
And the thing with Cavalleria Rusticana is that it's almost impossible to translate the title. It might be rustic chivalry or rustic justice, hard justice, whatever. And it's somewhat about the beginning of the mafia in Sicily. That's where the opera takes place on Easter Day. And so it has this whole linkage between what's happening in the present day movie and this sort of core of where all this comes from. And Coppola directs it like one of the great opera directors. I mean, visually, it's a stunning scene. The best thing in that movie, I think.
But we have some movie directors doing opera also. They're great generally, and
Yeah. I
yes,
think Robert Altman
Robert
do
Altman, Woody Allen did an opera. There is this
Zeffirelli.
Zeffirelli, and also this chairman. I forgot the name. And the funny thing is that Cavalleria Rusticana and the Pagliacci are two small operas, 2 acts each. So generally they play them together. Start with
Yes.
Cavalleria Rusticana and end with Pagliacci.
Right. And when I did those, I paired them in an odd way. That I did Pagliacci in black and white. That was partly a budget thing with the company I was doing it with on the craft tint, the paper that you can put the chemical on that brings out all these gray tones. So I did that as an exercise in doing a black and white comic. And in Cavalleria Rusticana, we only had a 2-color process, not a 3-color.
Oh,
So we had red and yellow. We didn't have a blue. But I drew it in pencil, and that takes on sort of a blue sheen. And you put yellow with an ink wash, and that gives you a kind of a green, khaki green, or army uniform green. And I tell this to people, and they have no idea that that's just a 2-strip color comic. It looks like it's full color. So those were both exercises in how to do something with a restricted palette or no palette at all, just working monochromatically. And that's
yes.
kind of what teams them together.
Sometimes it's a surprise in the end, in this kind of mixture of bichromie and such.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yes.
No, can I? It's my turn now, I guess.
Okay.
Are you mix a question from Marcelo Bouhid for one of my? As I ask you, how is to work with Neil Gaiman, with the way of making the script, the pass to you, and not panel by panel. Did you work directly with Michael Moorcock?
No, I never. I didn't meet him or talk to him until decades later. I ran into him in Austin, Texas, at the Dallas Fantasy Fair, I think. I kind of learned how to work doing adaptations when I was doing The Dreaming City, because Roy Thomas was doing the script.
Yes.
And he worked Marvel synopsis style.
Yeah.
And so he sends me this synopsis about it, but of course I went right to the novel too. I could never understand artists who would work on adaptations and just work from the synopsis. You want to go hear all the descriptions of, the evocative language and the architecture and costumes and all of that. So I didn't have to write the final script, but I was following the book closely when I was laying out my pages and was matching Moorcock's dialogue with the characters panel by panel and writing that into it. So that was like training wheels for me on how to do an adaptation.
In Stormbringer was the same?
Well, no, Stormbringer, there were some bad feelings over this because we were, Mike Friedrich was, in charge of all of these Elric adaptations. Then I did the one with Michael T. Gilbert that starts with Volume 1, and then Michael and George Freeman did Volume 2. Volume 3 came up to the stuff I had done, and they went beyond that. And Mike had always asked me if I would do Stormbringer, but at this point, I saw no need to have another writer between me and the original material. So I said, I will do it, but only if I can do the final script. So we wrangled that back and forth for a few years because, of course, Roy had been doing it and wanted to continue. But Mike finally said, you can do the script. So I think there were maybe some hard feelings about not getting to continue on it. At the same time, I saw no reason to have someone else do the final words on what I did. So it was like 10 years by the time we could get around to doing Stormbringer. One odd story about that, I was teaching a course at Kent State University in 1981 and 83, and in 83 is when I was working with Michael T. Gilbert on Elric, and I told one of my students, we were talking about this adaptation, and I said the dragon helm is really difficult to draw because it's got, the way I've designed it has these dragon sort of bat wings, and you try to draw it from 3/4 angle up from below, and where do those go? How do you get that correct? Well, this guy was wanting to get to Hollywood and design models and all that. He said, well, if you ever do Stormbringer, let me know. I'll build a dragon helm for you. It was 10 years later, and on the off chance I still had his phone number, I called him up in Cleveland, and he came down to Kent, and this was 2 or 3 weeks before he left for Hollywood, and he would have been gone. And so he came down. I did a frontal and a side shot of the helmet. He went home and built it. I still have it.
He built it a dragon helm.
Yes. So that whenever you see it from whatever angle, above or below, from the side, it's correct.
That's amazing.
That's where those works.
I always find that helm thing in Elric at a clumsy thing, even to use. if you excuse me, no one will use that in a battle or in a dragon back, I guess.
Oh, right, yes, of course. Yeah, and capes get in the way a lot too, I would think, and yet there we are, we use them. I love capes because it can be this abstract shape, that can go anywhere and really accentuate the emotion or the action. Or if you're having a problem with the figure, you can wrap it around, and there you go.
I saw
you just cover it up with tape.
some years in a comic, in a superhero comic, I saw a character that he has a gimmick. He uses a cape, but he has a button. When the beginning of the fight, he pushes the button and the cape, shloop, disappears.
There you go.
Okay, that's very smart.
I'm just wondering here, and music and the fantasy are two things that take us from where we are and drive us to other lands, other worlds. And how did it started to you, this think of music and fantasy? Do you associate them one with another? And how was you as a kid learning music and reading fantasy?
Well, reading fantasy, I think it was earlier than that. I went to see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and there's a scene where the queen goes down into the dungeon she's going to change into the witch. She's coming down the stairs, and everything is dark, and her dress or raiment is dark and purple. But as she goes down, all of a sudden that cape flared up, and underneath it's scarlet. And I remember, 7 years old, just like this, reacting to that color. And then a couple years later, I'm old enough that I was there at the first release of Sleeping Beauty, and I would have been like 9 years old in 1960, and that with the Ivan Earl stylized backgrounds based on medieval illuminated manuscripts and Persian decorative arts and manuscripts, with this very sort of 1950s sensibility. And I remember square trees. If you look at those, he draws square trees because everything is linear and horizontal and vertical, and just cluing into that right away. I mean, I was primed. So there's something that you're born with, that you are just waiting for that spark, to ignite. And those were two of the earliest. Then reading fantasy as a teenager with the Robert E. Howard Conans. They were on the rack at Hill's department store, and it was the Frazetta covers that got me to pick them up. I'd never seen his work before, but I knew I wanted to read these books, and that's what both got me into Frazetta and the sword and sorcery genre were the first ones. And then, of course, The Lord of the Rings and H.P. Lovecraft, devouring all of that. And then a lot of the comics, like Creepy and Eerie, Archie Goodwin was writing all those stories. That was all fantasy and horror.
Did you just a little now? You get the fantasy at the beginning of the boom of the fantasy with Conan, with Lovecraft, but recently, if you can say, for some 10 or 15 years for now, we have a little resurgence of fantasy in the other medias, like movies, a little because the Lord of the Ring from Peter Jackson,
Yes.
and we have a lot of more attention to fantasy, or in books, in movies, and television, and other medias. Did you see something that catch your eye, or do you say, oh, this is good, oh, look, I like this? And and I can say, because these materials in other medias has some Craig Russell DNA in it, because the people who are doing the fantasy now has some influence of your work in that. Did you see something you see, oh, that's good, that something like that? I like it.
I've never seen anything that I thought, well, that's me. I mean, so yeah, I hardly know how to answer that, because it's hard to see any influence. It is for me, if there's any influence there at all, other than we're all influenced by everybody else, I think, in the genre that we grew up with.
Or just something you see, okay, I like that, I like this one, I like that one. Some fantasy material from media that you see, you like it.
Well, certainly Guillermo del Toro's films, yes, work very well. And The Lord of the Rings, I was just absolutely blown away by those adaptations. Tremendously difficult to take a piece of work that large, and the inherent dangers of it. I know that fans were upset that Tom Bombadil, a lot of fans, how could you leave out Tom Bombadil? But even with these 4-hour-long movies, something has to go. So it's difficult.
I still hear to this day the discussion of Balrog has wings or not.
Who? What?
I still talk to Tolkien fans, and there is a discussion: the Balrog has wings or not?
Oh, yes.
Until this day.
Yes.
And some people say they had. I saw in the movie.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like I was talking about earlier, that if you're taking this literary property and you're making it, you're concretizing it, you're making it real, and so you're having to make decisions that aren't necessarily there, the decisions that the author hasn't made clear.
Guillermo del Toro, in his Cabinet of Curiosity, make a lot of decisions in segments that are derived from Lovecraft that raise some eyebrows. Okay, ghosts are not that way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not the way. But it was an amazing job.
Yeah, well, Lovecraft has influenced just about everybody with Cthulhu and all that, to the point where I don't think it should ever be considered that it's derivative or what. It's just part of the language, and it's there for us to work with that imagery.
Yes, and it's.
Of course, he's always talking about like the picture of a horror that could drive a person mad if they see it. Now, in the comics, if you're going to try to draw that, people are going to look at it. Well, yeah, but it's not driving me mad. There was an Alex Toth story in Creepy or Eerie about an artist who was doing this painting. I mean, he might have been in an insane asylum or whatever. And of course, it was Alex Toth. The artwork was wonderful. I thought they made the mistake at the end of showing the painting itself, which was some sort of bloody scene. But that mystery, you had to leave that in the viewer's head. They have to do that themselves. If you show them, then it's gone. Unless you have actually drawn a picture that
One of
a guy maybe could do that. There was a sense in his that he was tapping into something that really was deeply disturbing, but that's almost never happens.
I'm a great fan of horror movies too, and one of the biggest horror movies of all times are Rosemary's Baby, and the biggest thing in Rosemary's Baby is they never show the devil. They never show.
Yes.
But you see, and when they say he has his father's eyes, it's all you have to imagine the devil in the movie.
Yes. You don't show it. I heard the story when Spielberg was making Jaws. He had so much trouble with the shark, this mechanical shark, and Hitchcock was there and told him about it's much more frightening if you don't see it. It's under the surface. If you've ever, your foot has hit a piece of seaweed or something, it's just when you're in the water, it's disturbing. And he let the music be the shark. And all you had to hear was that music, and you had a shark. Okay, then just bring it out at the last moment when you absolutely have to show it. But it's the things unseen that you make happen in the viewer's head that are much more effective.
Which is that's very difficult to do in comics, because comics you must show. Greg, just a second. I guess we are a lot of stretch of the time we agreed for. Did you have some more minutes to in this conversation, or you have to go?
I'm fine. Someone might even be here coming over at 7:30. I need to write him a check, but I think he's fine. You were going to ask Aristides. Were you going to ask something?
Oh, please ask.
I would say that in Jaws you have the Wagner also, the leitmotif from Wagner. It's used all the time in movies. But my question is, do you play any instruments? Do you read music? How is your approach to the music?
Well, I play piano. I have a piano here, and there's a number of things I play. Like I said, when I was doing that 4-pager from American Gods, where from the very opening, one of those Somewhere in America stories, the Queen of Sheba, as she swallows that man up through her vagina, at the end of that, his cell phone is just left and it starts ringing, and it's playing the Beethoven's Ode to Joy. That's the
Ninth
ringtone.
Symphony.
So I went to the piano and I, da 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 da, picked it out. And so I drew the staves in that panel and put the notes. So if you actually play those notes, it's the Ode to Joy.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then also I had a book with an analysis of the ring. So it had all these musical things. I go and I play those through and hear them myself, separate them out from the opera.
In 2 days from now, we will have in Rio an reunion of people, an event about music. And I will have 15 minutes, 20 minutes talking about music and comics. And you will be there, of course. Your work will be there, but I didn't know this. I will search for it. It's in the moment of the giant vagina,
yeah, it's the first chapter, and then there's this 4-page. He interpolated all these Somewhere in America or Coming to America short stories in the middle of the broad narrative. And the first issue I laid out was that first chapter. But it was like a full 22 pages. And I asked them to add, if we could add pages so that 4-page could be in, so that in that first issue, you could see by the end that things were going to get really weird. That first chapter just was sort of a setup. And I thought it was really important to show this the very graphically sexual scene that I, in a sense, didn't make really graphic. It was very symbolic, the way you see it, and as it plays out. And as he comes to his senses and he's being swallowed up, like a Venus flytrap. That was a challenge to do right, and I really wanted it in that first issue. So it's like pages 21 to 25 or something of the whole thing.
Search for it. And the Ninth Symphony, the joy of Beethoven is there.
Yes, that's right there.
Okay,
and
great.
She answers the phone and says, "Oh, he's gone away."
Saladino?
So,
Just a minute. Okay. So sorry. I am seeing all questions from Marcelo, and there is none. We all ask all.
Okay.
You answer all of it.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I think if we covered everything, anything else you...
I just want you to talk. It's not a question. You want to talk a little about recent. I see in your website that you sell your originals of your. I want you to talk a little because a lot of people are seeing this interview. Will be very interested to know that they can buy an original of Kurt Russell. If you can talk about.
So, yeah, I've been in part to raise money for our new book, the 50 Years in Full Color, which is ready to go to the printer. I've been putting some of the Stormbringer pages. Most of my artwork is in storage at Ohio State University. So all of the Ring of the Nibelung, the Dream Hunters, Doctor Strange, the Oscar Wilde fairy tales. But sometimes I'll take one particular story and break that up. The Elric Stormbringer is something that has, I think, more commercial appeal than selling the artwork from the Magic Flute, for example.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. So certain things I've let go. I sold the artwork years ago to Sandman 50 before I had a scanner, and I regret that. So even if I sell something, I have good digital copies of it. So I have good Xerox copies of Sandman. But we can never do an artist's edition of it. Those pages have just gone to the four winds.
Guys, we are coming to the end. Okay. But I see the last question, please.
There's
not a question, just yes, it's a question, kind of. I was wondering if you know two artists from Brussels called Benoit Peters and François Scuitan. They do some very beautiful drawings, Squitan do the drawings, the other one is the writer. And they tell stories about city, and they have this strong influence on Art Nouveau also. They have a very known story here in Brazil called The Tower.
Oh, I think I do. How do you spell his last name, the artist's last name?
Benoît Peters et François Squitan.
Yes, Squitan. That's the artist?
Yes, Squitan is the artist.
Yes, I think I do know. Yes, a very elaborate.
Yes, yes.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful work.
Yeah,
Yes.
wonderful. They built a subway station in Paris. Yes.
With
under a museum in Paris for arts et métiers, arts and crafts. They redesigned the subway station to look like the interior of the submarine from Nautilus, the Nautilus from 2000.
20,000
Yes,
That's fantastic.
Yes. It's very, very. If you go to Paris, don't miss this station. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah.
Now I want to go to Paris.
Yes.
One more ticket to go to Paris.
Saladino, last question.
And Cassiano, you said there was one more question.
No, so the audience is quiet.
The people are very quiet because
we've worn them out. We've exhausted
too much information in a good sense.
You said everything they want to know. They want to know how it works. You say, how it work. You say how to make scripts, how to use. You said everything they want to know. It's a fantastic. It's a classroom how to make comics with you, Mister.
And that's an observation. Not just you draw very well, but you answer the question very well also. So it's very rich to hear. It's very rich. Thank you for everything.
Just say something.
It helped when I taught that first course in art at KSU. I could look at a person's work and say, well, that's not working. They say, well, why? And I think I have to know how to explain this, and that got me started. So thank you so much for asking me for this. It's been a great time. Love talking to you. Love talking about the subject.
I'd like to thank for your participation, and I want to apologize for being quiet. The audience says that my voice was strange on the mic, and
there is some issues with the transmission and the Skype and something like that.
I didn't want to get to
okay.
But I would say thank you very much for today. It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
And a really honor. I can say how honored I am to talk to you. The audience is fantastic to see the great Craig Russo here talking to us, talking about his art. It's an honor. It's a privilege. Thank you very much.
So much.
Mr. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Had a good time.
Bye, Ray.
Bye, Mister.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're the maestro.
Okay, guys.
Guys.
Pessoal.
Ele ainda tá em inglês.
Fiquei um pouco frustrado por não falar. Não sei como é que tá a minha voz, na verdade.
Aqui a gente não sabe porque a gente está vendo.
A gente está ouvindo bem aqui. A gente tá ouvindo bem aqui.
Eles falaram que estava com delay quando você me chamou, ficou normal, mas antes eles falaram que estava com delay.
Um pouco frustrado porque, na verdade, não sabia se eu podia falar ou não. Então.
Eu corri para falar o que precisava.
Agora, o Vão Deus agora falou que tá de boa. Pô, tô aqui me segurando. Agora tá de boa, valeu.
Porra, Vão Deus, fala que tava de boa antes.
Eu aqui calado, eu assim, desesperado. Eu falei, pô, não vou falar porque o Vão Deus falou que teve um momento que a minha pergunta tava em cima da voz do Craig. Aí, pô.
Eu vi ele falando lá.
Falei,
agora, que figura
calado.
fantástica, hein? Que figura fantástica.
Foi realmente uma aula de você ver como que a pessoa como que o artista adapta, como que ele faz, como que ele trabalha.
Culto, cara.
É
impressionante.
fantástico,
Impressionante.
fantástico.
E como que o processo
Inteligente.
dele é consciente, não é intuitivo. Né? Ele
É
tem
legal, porque
consciência do que ele
e,
está fazendo, do porquê, dos métodos, muito fantástico, fantástico.
e partes é consciente e partes é intuitivo.
Sim,
Porque toda aquela
questão
coisa
da
de
criatividade,
fazer a
lógico,
fluidez e tal, é como ele falou que ele precisava explicar para as pessoas como que ele trabalha, no caso, né, de dar retorno. E é legal como ele tem consciência, é como ele falou, tudo está na página porque tem um motivo para estar na página, tem um porquê estar na página, tem um motivo. Pode ser uma página que todos os quadros são iguais, são 6 quadros iguais, 8 quadros iguais, ou pode ser uma página completamente diferente.
Eu não podia,
muito
fiquei
legal.
calado. Pô. Aí eu fiquei frustrado, sério, Mas, anyway...
Ó, pra quem não tá sabendo, vamos explicar um pouquinho, pra quem não falou, por que tá diferente e tudo?
O Craig não sabe usar o StreamYard.
Ele tava tendo problemas para falar no StreamYard e a gente fez essa entrevista pelo Skype.
E eu tô usando o OBS.
E pra usar o Skype,
daí...
o Cassiano teve que usar o OBS, que é um
a gente não tá mais no ar, não.
Estamos no ar.
Estamos no ar?
Por isso que eu tô avisando eles.
Por isso que eu tô falando pro público.
Estamos no ar, sim. E daí então, eu já estava nervoso porque antes de começar já estava dando chabu aqui no OBS. Daí quando eu comecei a falar, eu olhei para o lado aqui, vi a mensagem do Vão Deus falando: sua voz está ruim, está parecendo um robô. Daí eu falei: cara, não acredito. Aí eu comecei a passar a bola para vocês, eu não fiz pergunta. Eu fiz pergunta deles.
E o público que tá assistindo sabe, eles perdoam, eles desculpam a falta da sua a voz durante a entrevista.
Mas
foi uma
ele
entrevista
genial, cara.
espetacular,
ele é genial. Que
fantástico,
homem inteligente.
cara. Ele é muito bom, cara. É incrível.
Assim, se vocês não pegaram desde o início, eu espero que vocês estejam me escutando bem agora. Se vocês não pegaram desde o início a live, assistam. Porque aqui teve 1h30 de Craig Russell. Show. É genial. Eu tô pensando até se eu não faço um vídeo cobrindo com as coisas que ele falou. Porque é genial. É genial.
E assim, galera, avisem as pessoas que você conhece, que gosta de quadrinhos, que gosta de Sandman, que gosta de adaptações, porque o cara falou umas coisas fantásticas para quem gosta de adaptação, como se faz. Ele falando de como que é o processo de adaptar ópera, de adaptar livros, é um negócio fantástico.
Respondeu
gente.
Aqui, o Alex Barroso estava perguntando se ele tem outra ópera para lançar. Pô, soltou um spoiler aqui pra gente, cara.
E calmamente soltou, falou: vou fazer isso, vou fazer isso seco.
Pronto. Assim, genial. Eu tô feliz, muito feliz pela live e frustrado por não ter conseguido fazer as perguntas. Mas tudo bem, assim. Ele é um homem genial. Daqui a pouco eu vou mandar um e-mail para ele agradecendo, pedindo mais uma vez desculpa. Eu acho que ele ficou esperando eu perguntar alguma coisa, mas eu estava com medo de perguntar.
Não, eu acho que ele entendeu, porque a gente ficou conversando e as perguntas foram muito legais, né? Assim, fica por Marcelo Bouhid, que não pôde
mais
participar.
Uma vez, obrigado.
Eu fiz quase todas as perguntas
Bouhid,
dele.
Porque as perguntas do Bouhid foram feitas, ele estava representado aqui mais uma vez. Quero mais uma vez aqui também. Quero fazer um pedido aqui para a galera que assiste a gente. Se tiver alguém disposto a me ajudar a traduzir, porque assim, eu estou levando 20 dias para fazer a tradução das legendas. Eu consigo fazer para inglês, consigo transcrever a live toda em inglês e depois eu não tenho tempo, a verdade é essa. Eu chego do trabalho tarde e daí eu peço ajuda da galera que está em casa. Se alguém quiser colaborar, fica aqui o convite de você poder participar como audiência de uma live. Você entrar no StreamYard, pelo amor de Deus, não pelo OBS, não. Pelo OBS, não.
Skype não, por favor. A gente gosta do Skype.
Eu gosto, mas assim...
Cada um seu quadrado, né?
Fica o convite. Quer ajudar, vai ter sempre uma vaguinha para assistir a live e, quem sabe, participar de uma ao vivo com a gente também. Então,
conversando,
exato.
batendo papo com convidado e tudo mais, e com a gente.
Então, fica aí esse convite para quem puder ajudar. Realmente porque eu quero traduzir a live. Eu traduzo, só que é no meu tempo, e eu sei que vocês querem assistir logo. Então, uma mão ajuda a outra e a gente vai seguindo assim. Mais uma vez, muito obrigado. Desculpa por ter ficado calado também para quem está em casa. Eu fiquei realmente com medo de falar e estragar totalmente a live. Então achei melhor ficar calado. Para minha sorte, eu tenho ao meu lado dois grandes amigos, Aristides e Rogério Saladino.
1,89 m, eu.
Assim,
1,80 m.
Eu tenho 1,75 m, ou seja, vocês são muito mais altos do que eu. Eu sou um hobbit.
Grandes amigos.
Somos grandes amigos.
Grandes nomes dos quadrinhos.
Fizeram dessa live uma coisa grandiosa, porque o Craig é um cara sensacional. A gente acabou de esquecendo de perguntar se ele vem ao Brasil ou não. Mas quem sabe, who knows? Cara, eu tô feliz porque ele é um cara genial, assim. Escutei coisas muito boas sobre o processo, sabe?
E pessoas, assim, você que chegou aqui e não conhece o material do Craig Russell, vai procurar, vai ler, é um material fantástico. O cara fez algumas das melhores adaptações que eu já vi. Como eu disse, eu falei pra ele, eu sou um grande fã de Elric e de Manny Boné, é muito bom. Eu adoro, eu sou fã. E uma das primeiras coisas que eu li de Elric foi a Graphic Globo, na época, que saiu aqui nos anos 80, chamada A Cidade dos Sonhos, Elric, A Cidade dos Sonhos, que foi desenhada por ele. Foi o primeiro quadrinho que ele adaptou do Elric. Aí eu fui atrás dos livros, eu li todos os livros, li o que mais saiu, tudo. Assim, procurem o material dele, é fantástico, é maravilhoso. O cara é uma das referências quando se fala de quadrinhos de fantasia.
Essa live logo. O André Freitas comentou aqui assim, achei melhor nesse esquema da live toda em inglês. Já tá assim desde o Todd McFarlane, né, gente?
Desde o Todd McFarlane.
Do Todd tem muita audiência, tem muito view, porque é o Todd McFarlane. Mas ele fala que sem a tradução interrompendo, mas diminui o alcance. Diminui. Por isso que eu tento traduzir. Por exemplo.
Por isso que é bom ter a legenda e tal.
Tanto que o vídeo que eu já legendei do Sakai, uma parte, tem muito mais view do que a live em si. Porque tá legendado.
O legendado ajuda. A gente vai fazendo, o Cassiano vai fazendo, a gente pede ajuda de vocês. Eu não chego e falo, beleza, deixa que eu traduzo, porque a última vez que eu fiz isso eu demorei pra caramba pra fazer.
A do Sakai, por exemplo, eu tô com ela toda transcrita. Só que eu não tive tempo de traduzir toda. Então eu traduzi aqueles 15 minutos iniciais. Então assim, daí eu vou agora mais 15 minutos.
Vamos fazendo assim. Quem puder ajudar, a gente agradece.
Entendeu? Mas galera,
entre em contato com o Cassiano, que a gente agradece.
Obrigado.
A gente não paga porque a gente...
O que eu posso oferecer
é
uma live com um convidado internacional, a pessoa está aqui assistindo de dentro da nave, né? No StreamYard, de preferência. No StreamYard.
E dando os créditos. Dando os créditos, obviamente, porque aí vai saber tradução de fulano de tal. Aí,
já até abro a live
com...
Até abro o vídeo com tradução fulano de tal. Aqui a gente dá crédito para todo mundo. Dá crédito no início, dá crédito no final. Crédito é sempre importante. Mais uma vez, gente, muito obrigado. Muito obrigado a vocês. Lembrando, se você ficou aqui até agora, deixa aquele seu like, compartilha com os amigos, avisa que está em inglês. Mas se der mole, daqui a 2 dias, o próprio Google, o YouTube, já reconhece algumas como está praticamente todo em inglês, e já vai reconhecer o próprio áudio, já começa a fazer a a transcrição dele, que não é perfeita, mas se você estiver muito desesperado para assistir, já dá para pegar a transcrição e clicar lá em traduzir. Daí você vai conseguir assistir.
E daqui a pouquinho tem traduzido também. Aproveita, dá uma olhada nas anteriores, nas outras que a gente está aqui. O Cassiano se rala para conseguir entrevistas com outros nomes legais e bacanas do
posso dizer que tem mais uma vindo aí.
Opa! Quem tá vindo aí, Cassiano?
Mas assim, posso dizer uma coisa? Tem a ver com o Sandman também.
Opa!
Quero puxar sardinha, não,
tem
mas sabe assim, sei lá.
Então isso.
Se você gosta de Sandman, vai gostar dessa entrevista. Vamos lá, vamos ver se consegue.
A gente trabalha para isso. Okay.
Não é o Neil Gaiman.
Não é o Neil Gaiman.
Não é o Neil Gaiman.
Não sei se você sabe, mas eu gosto muito de Sandman.
A gente fez 11 programas, né? Gente, mais uma vez, muito obrigado para quem está em casa. Eu me despeço de vocês aqui e me despeço dos meus amigos offline, tá? Para vocês que ficam em casa, tudo de bom, um abraço. A gente se esbarra para este mundo até, quem sabe, semana que vem. Aguarde novidades.
Vamos lá.
Bye, bye. Eu fiquei